There you go. Bonjour, mes amis. It is delightful to be here with you this evening, this afternoon, maybe even the morning, depending on where you're calling in from. And I am delighted to be here today with the most illustrious Dr. Stephanie Nielsen. Bonjour, Madel.
Good
And
evening,
we
darling.
Yes, we are going to have the privilege and pleasure of speaking to you all around dementia and Alzheimer's, something that people fear, something that people bear witness to, and creates that fear. And so tonight, what we hope we can do is talk about exactly what it is, talk about what causes it, and then talk about very tangible things you can be doing in your day-to-day life in order to stave off and prevent such an outcome for yourself. So, Dr. Nielsen, how you doing?
Doing awesome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing, you know what? I'm calling in from Toronto and it's currently snowing here. We've been seesawing. It goes up to 20 some days and then down to zero and snows. So I'm confused.
Well,
If
I
there's any
think you and the rest of the world are going through the same thing.
if there's any strong Toronto folk here, I say hi and please identify yourselves in the chat. Let us know if you're dealing with the snow. So let's dive into dementia and Alzheimer's and the fact that one is the other, but the other isn't necessarily everything. So why don't you give us some working definitions around what is dementia and what is Alzheimer's?
So, dementia and memory loss is when we have cognitive decline, and the
Hmm.
cognitive decline can oftentimes start with short-term memory. The
Hmm.
long-term memory tends to have been around longer, and so the body tends to hold that. There are multiple different labels on dementia, but a lot of them start with senior moments, and
Mm.
then we forget maybe how to run a cell phone, and then maybe we forget how to drive a car, or we become less and less comfortable doing activities. Alzheimer's is a specific disease state. It is often recognized by lesions in the brain, which are called amyloid plaques. And honestly, in the last few years, there's been some questions about the science
Yeah,
of the amyloid plaques,
yeah.
though the journal Science is considered probably the premier science um, journal as far as ultimately looking at like all things science. And it was
Hmm.
interesting because in 2022, there was a pretty good article. In 2018 is when some of the controversy came out about the amyloid plaques. And in 2022, one of the science researchers uh, came out and spoke, and he had been a Alzheimer researcher as well as an editor for all of Science. And
Mm.
there is no doubt that there are amyloid plaques and that amyloidosis, if you will,
Yeah.
happens. In fact, the Alzheimer's was actually named after a researcher, a female researcher. Um, I don't think it was Eloise, but it sounded something like Eloise Alzheimer. Alois, Alois
Alois.
Alzheimer.
Hmm.
And it was named because she was the first one to recognize after
Hmm.
someone had died and they were looking at brains that they noticed that the neurons didn't look right and that there was thickened and dark plaques.
Hmm.
Um, so, despite the controversy, what we're now really looking at is, especially here, what can we do to prevent it? Those are
Yeah.
proteins that accumulate.
Hmm.
And what do we need to do to keep ourselves balanced to flush so that
Yeah.
we don't have that accumulation? And what would you add for dementia and Alzheimer's from your perspective as a naturopath?
Yeah, I think I would offer two things. I think in particular for people who are bearing witness as their parents get older for things to be looking for. I think additional to senior moments, one thing I'd really want to capture there is the mood and the disposition of a person. If you have someone who's been pretty even keel most of their life, and then all of a sudden they're presenting with a bit more anger or a bit more frustration.
Mhm.
That sometimes is part of the memory loss, but also can be just more a byproduct of them getting really frustrated because they know they're having all these moments and there's an element of them not wanting to share that, but they still get very frustrated. So behavioral changes, I think, is something else to become very mindful of. If you've always had a person that's one way and all of a sudden something's shifting, that does necessitate a few questions, just because I know we have a lot of people who join these webinars who do so from a caregiver perspective, from someone who loves older
Mhm.
folk in their life and wanting to think of that. Um, and then I think the other thing as a naturopath that I'd really want to offer into this conversation, especially someone that looks at genes. This evening, we're going to be talking about genes, in particular, one that we know is really, really, really well tied to Alzheimer's. We're going to be talking about APOE.
Mhm.
But I think it's really important that as we have conversations tonight, there is not one cause of Alzheimer's or one cause of
Mhm.
everything that kind of fits under the umbrella that is dementia, right? Even though we're going to be talking about one of the most notable genes with dementia, there are a lot of people with poor genetic presentations for that, but do not have dementia.
Mhm.
Additionally, there are people that do not have that gene presentation and yet they do have dementia, right? And so it's, does that gene shift your odds? Absolutely. I don't want to dismiss it, but there's so many other factors that lend to dementia. And so I think really appreciating all of them becomes all the more important because you want to control for what you can. Right.
Mhm.
And there's many things that can be controlled for. It's not just this one gene, or it's not just the plaques that may be forming in the brain that we're now not as sure what does that mean, chicken and egg sort of situation.
And you know what? I think you bring up a really good point, and this is
Mm,
so important for caregivers. Is my father has Alzheimer's,
mhm.
and we noticed that that whole socialization, he became less
Yeah.
interested in going to
Yeah.
play golf, which he had always loved. He became
Hmm. Yeah.
less willing to go hang out with his buddies and have coffee. If mom would go, he would go.
Yeah.
And then the whole frustration thing
Yeah.
ended up coming down to fear,
Yeah.
fear that someone would recognize this in him because he was recognizing it himself. Fear because if he got asked a question that he
Hmm.
couldn't answer or that he couldn't remember, would he be able to even think his way out of it?
Yeah.
I actually have a neighbor whose husband is going through this, and she has been in denial, just
Yeah.
saying he's just becoming more obstinate. And one of the things that I shared
Oh,
with her
wow.
is he's shutting down because the brain's not working. And now is the time for you to get him tested. We were fortunate that we went to a senior center in a hospital and they had a whole cognitive support
Yeah.
area that they could test. Now, my father did not test for diagnose or test for Alzheimer's in the beginning. They said he had
Hmm.
mild cognitive impairment. He ended up having a diagnosis, which is a whole mouthful. It was multi faceted amnesic disorder, which means he had like these pockets of rooms. If you're a Harry Potter
Hmm.
fan, or if you know about Harry Potter, there's a disappearing room. His brain would do that. Sometimes he could talk all about business and all about golf.
Yeah.
And sometimes that room disappeared. And you'd say, have you played golf? And he said, I've never played, but I'd like to try. And
Hmm.
he golfed for years. So if that room
Yeah.
disappeared, then it was as if he had never
Yeah.
experienced this. So we thought we were safe because, oh, he has a mild form of memory loss. Oh,
Hmm.
he has a mild form. Just so that you know, dementia, 60 to 80% of dementia can eventually become Alzheimer's. So if you have an early diagnosis of dementia, that doesn't mean you'll eventually get there, but more and more because they're finding
Hmm.
other ways to diagnose Alzheimer's
Yeah.
and the breadth and depth of it. Um, and they're all different. So
Yeah.
really what we want to cover tonight is, do you have any in your family? Do
Hmm.
you have any odds? And what can you do now to either
Yeah.
help a loved one that's going through this or help yourself to avoid that?
Yeah.
Because there are things and lots of things that are within your control that you can
Yes.
do.
Yes, yes. And I would even offer, and I think we'll get into this in a little bit, even if you are, so you notice this in a loved one and a parent, there's so much impetus to get that testing, even if it just comes back as a mild diagnosis, because once you have that mild diagnosis, there are things that can be done to either halt the progression, i.e., you kind of sit stagnant for a while, it doesn't get worse. And there is some evidence that we can reverse it a little bit, right? We
Mhm.
can't make everything go back to normal per se, but it doesn't have to be this progression. So getting that diagnosis is so very important because it just shifts how aggressive you are with a lot of the intervention in order to stave it off.
Right.
Yeah.
Love it.
So, shall we jump into that family question, really, and the question that is
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's jump
can
into
it
the
lead to
poll
a
and see where
gene?
we stand.
Oh, look at you keeping me in order. I value you so much. Dr. Varden and other webinars keeps me on track. You keep me on track here. I'm grateful for
Teamwork.
you. Teamwork, dreamwork. All right. Do you want to go through our poll questions here or
I'd be
shall
happy to. The first
please?
question that we asked was, how familiar are you with the role genetics play in cognitive decline and Alzheimer's? Somewhat. So 72% overwhelming. And I think
Mhm.
because there's so much in the news and so much that many
Yeah.
of us are experiencing, especially if you're older than 40 or 50, and we're starting to see. So that is great. We have some experts here that are very familiar, and we would love to have your insight. If there's something as we're going through that you'd like to add,
Mhm.
more
Please.
than welcome to put that in the chat, and we'll try to address it if we can. I know people who are going through this or who have been through this. Certainly, that real world experience is a huge benefit to everyone who's here tonight and wants
Yeah.
to learn. Two,
Yeah.
have you or your family member been genetically tested for Alzheimer related markers, such as you were just mentioning, the
Yeah.
APOE?
Mhm.
And
See?
yeah, I don't know why I stumbled over that. I was like, "Blah."
No, words. It's
Hooked
okay.
on
We'll get there.
phonics, you know. Yes, 46% have, no, 40% have not, and about 7% doesn't know. So we're evenly split on that. They either don't know if they have been or yes, they have been. So I'm
Mhm.
interested in the yeses, and I'm going to have you put this in the chat now. Of the 46% of you that answered yes, how many of you had the ApoE gene? Just go ahead and put
Mm.
in, if I did, and we'll see, if there's two or three of you, or if there's,
Yeah.
30 of you. I'll be
Yeah.
interested and see.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
Michelle said she
Michelle's.
did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else who remembers getting checked and remembering if they did? I'd really like to know, because I really wanted to. Oh, look, we've got several that did. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll let you keep putting that in, keep putting those in, and then we'll see what we've got,
Mhm.
because we will go through ApoE tonight.
Mhm.
Which topics interest you most? 13% understanding the genetics, 33% early prevention, 33% nutritional and lifestyle. Well, that's perfect because we can go into both of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
19% advanced brain testing. Make sure. And then, are you aware that the DNA 360 addresses proactive strategies for protecting your brain? No, 58%, almost 60% did not. And I'm glad for those 42% of you. You probably are here because of that. And we want to just add to that tonight. So
Yeah.
thank you. I'm going to go back and look at the chat while you kind of step next into some of our prevention. And maybe because we talked about the ApoE, let's start there,
Yeah.
because I saw a few people
Yeah.
that were putting in
Yeah.
what
I want to
specific.
I'm excited about this one because I think we get to demystify it. I think most people in the general public have heard about this gene based on just simply pop science, but not many can say actually what it does or why we care about it. So let's break down what ApoE is. So ApoE is a gene that codes for a protein that is called apolipoprotein E. That is the last time I'm going to be saying that because I will never get it out again. But what is this little guy? What is your ApoE? You can kind of think about ApoE like a little truck or a little car. And what it likes to do is it likes to zoom around the body and pick up fat molecules. Okay. So its job, kind of think about it like Uber or Lyft or a taxi or something like that within the body. So it drives around and it will pick up different fat lipids. or like just little bubbles, if you will, of fat, right? And so this can be your LDLs. You've probably heard about that from blood work and your doctor being like, no, you want those low. And then it'll also pick up our HDLs, right? And that tends to be what we think of as a little bit more protective, right? And what it does is it will take these little fat bubbles and it will deliver them within the body. Remember that when we think about our bodies and how our bodies are composed, there's a lot of water, there's a lot of fat, there's a lot of muscle, right? So these little guys deliver it where it needs to go. And so when you look at the APOE gene, it can come out one of three different ways, or it can come out with a different presentation. Each presentation kind of speaks to how good is your car, right? Does your car like to pick up a lot of people? Is it not a great car? What type of car, what type of taxi do you have? Okay. So when you are within your mother, you're given one set of genes from papa, one set of genes from mama. Okay. Toss them together. It means you get two ApoEs. And this becomes really important because it'll change your risk a little bit. Okay. If you are given an ApoE 2, that's the number 2 from either mama or papa, you can kind of think about this like a really chill, laid back ApoE driver. If you're only getting 1, 2 from either mama, papa, meaning you're getting 2 and then a different number, this tends to be a really good thing. It tends to be very, very protective because it's such a chill driver. It's not driving around a lot of fat, and it tends to be a lot more beneficial for the body. Okay. If you have tutus, that's a different story. That's very rare, and that's something you probably should talk to a geneticist around. Often does not happen, but the next allele that you can be getting, the next number that you're getting, next type of car that you could be getting is ApoE 3. Okay. And you kind of think about this like as your everyday taxi driver. They come, they pick stuff up, they deliver it. They'll do a really good job. They're not doing too much, they're not doing too little. Okay. And when we talk about in terms of risk, this is a middle of the road risk. It doesn't give you benefit like the 2 might, but it also doesn't give you any risk like the next one might. The next one is the 4 driver. Okay. With the 4 driver, kind of think about it as like someone that just doesn't want to be doing their job. They're not moving cholesterol around a lot. And what this can mean, though, is that cholesterol, and especially stuff that you don't want hanging around, right, tends to clump up, right? If there's no one picking up people after a concert, they tend to become this ball that is problematic within the body, right? And so that can be why you'll see elevated fat levels within certain blood work. And this is why it can increase risk towards Alzheimer's, because you think about the brain's, Dr. Nielsen, what is 60 to 70% like fat if we're
Yeah.
not considering water? It's a very high percentage of fat, right? There has to be a lot of taxis going in and around the brain. So if those taxis are your lazy, the tricky taxis that aren't doing their job properly, you're gonna get fat that kind of hangs out or not getting the proper fat. It's just not working very well. It kind of clogs everything up. So this, remember, you're going to get 1 copy from mama, 1 copy from papa. Most people will have a 3-3, which again, remember our threes are kind of, they're doing their job. So this isn't an additional risk.
They're an average worker that shows up. You don't want to fire them, but you're not necessarily going to promote them.
Yes, ma'am. Those are the taxis. The ones you want to be concerned with are going to be those 4s. And I want to demystify this a little bit, right? When we think about the prevalence of a 4, and this is very specific to a European diaspora or Caucasian population, but 25% of the Caucasian population will have at least one 4 allele. So it's not exceptionally rare. It happens. That's really important to remember, right? A lot of people may have this allele. It doesn't mean everyone has dementia. There's a lot that can be done, right? So if you have 1 copy of the 4 allele, unfortunately, it's increasing your risk towards dementia by 2 to 3 times, okay, a normal risk. And unfortunately, if you have 2 copies of the 4, it's even higher. It can be up to 10 times depending on the study. So it's a markedly greater increased risk. And so if you are someone with an ApoE 4-4, right, really working with the clinician to understand what can be done is important because the risk is so high. Dr. Nielsen, did I miss anything there? Or do you
No,
think
and no,
you're
and I
happy with that?
love Lynn made a mention. Well, we all have ApoE. And you're right, Lynn, maybe I should have defined it differently, but I'm so glad that Dr. Kosterman went through understanding that we've got, ideal, we've got middle of the road, and then we have the ones that we have to be more careful or more
They're
cognizant
tricky.
of. And
Yeah.
the beautiful thing about DNA is this gives us an opportunity to have a roadmap. And
Hmm.
with this roadmap, we say, okay, I know I'm set up because I have all these fours. And Len, you were right. Did I mean four? No, I meant all of it so that we can understand because, like, even a 2-2 increases your risk of type 3 hyper hyperlipid
Yeah.
So when you look at an APOE, you've got to look at, is my risk normal? Is it average? Do I lean more toward one end? Do I lean more toward the other? So besides the Alzheimer's, you look at coronary artery disease risk, you look at ischemic stroke risk. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure, okay, where do I stand in my risk? And then what can I do about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's really important too, and this is for all the folk on here that have their DNA 360, remember when, Dr. Steph was like, asked me the question of, as a naturopath, what do you want people to know? And my answer was that it's not caused by one thing. And I think this is important where we start to transition. Is ApoE important? Absolutely. Yes, it has marked impact. We just said it can increase your risk from 2 to 10 times, right? But it's not the only thing. And we need to dive into some of the other genes that further curate or shift that picture, especially for the folk out there that have that more tricky cab driver, the four, right? So
So a
Dr.
3-4 or a 4-4.
Or a 4-4, yeah. So Dr. Steph, when we think about other things that are not just ApoE, let's start talking about other genes and what they mean when it comes to how that can inform care to prevent dementia. So the first thing that comes to my mind, right? It's like we being in the medical community, we lovingly or begrudgingly call dementia diabetes type 3 almost, in the sense of there's an incredible correlation between people who have dementia, that's the cognitive memory sort of lost picture, the more general isn't yet Alzheimer's, and a presence of diabetes and unregulated blood sugar.
Mhm.
Are you agreeing to that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what I was going to say. My next probably gene that I look at would be a TCF7L2.
Yeah.
And, when we talk about insulin resistance or your metabolic health or
Hmm.
orthomolecular medicine, we're looking at what's happening at your body's ability to control your metabolism and control your metabolic health. So blood sugars and, what your lipid profiles look like. But with insulin, I think a lot of people don't understand your insulin is a storage hormone. It is a survival hormone that says, I
Hmm.
took food in, that's my fuel, and I'm going to store it for later.
Hmm.
Now, the question is, are you taking fuel because food is the only fuel your body understands? And are you giving an insulin a spike because it's going to grab, 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 grab and say, save? I don't know if I'll ever see this goodness again. And
Hmm.
then we pack on that weight around our waist and we pack on our thighs or wherever else that you pack on your body because your body's saying, I might never get to eat again. Therefore, I've got to save
Hmm.
all this.
Hmm.
Well, if you keep your blood sugar steady, or if you eat low glycemic foods and that blood sugar doesn't have a huge spike, like a lean meat is going to keep your blood sugar steady versus the carbohydrates we've heard or sugar will
Yeah.
spike. Now it'll come back down, but that causes that insulin to release. When the insulin releases, how effective is it? Does it
Hmm.
grab and bring it right back down?
Hmm.
Or does it go, kind of like one of those three threes. It's like, do my job, or maybe I won't. Maybe I feel like it today, or maybe I
Je ne sais pas.
won't, you know. And so, if there's a lot of insulin that's out there, but it's not doing its job, your blood sugar goes higher and higher and higher, and the body starts going, what am I going to do with all this sugar? And you lose your metabolic resilience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've got to look at. Now, how
I
many people, before we go on, how many people know they have insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, or they know that they're compromised, that their insulin doesn't work well? Go
Mhm.
ahead and put a 1 in the chat if you know you're already dealing with metabolic insufficiency or insulin
Mm.
resistance. Go ahead and put a 1. Okay, I see at least 1. I mean, we only have one
There's
person
one
that has
one.
insulin issue.
There's
And
one
I guess
one.
this is only if you know, maybe you
Yeah.
don't know, but
Yeah.
this is
We
a
okay,
key
now they're
thing for
coming
you to
in.
know.
Yeah.
Okay, here they
Yeah. They're
come.
starting to come in. Yeah. And as they continue to come in, I think this is a really important theme that we're seeing throughout dementia, and we'll hear a little bit more when we shift topics and talk about toxins. But I just talked about with APOE. Part of the issue there is you have bad taxi drivers that leave fat to kind of clump up and not do great things or not deliver it properly, right? There's this issue of just too much and it not being managed well. With insulin, when it's not managing the body properly, you're also seeing the same theme with sugar, right? And so we're really hearing how beautifully sensitive the brain is to these excessive things. And so it's not to say that dementia is a result of a person's diet and lifestyle exclusively. It's not to blame people, but there's an element of excessive fats, especially against a certain genotype, or extensive sugars against specifically a genotype, right? That really sets the brain up for a space where you're going to be getting that. And looking at this chat, Steph, look at that question you asked, all these ones that are doubling in.
Yeah. But I also see a lot of people that say, I don't know.
Mm.
So, I want us to talk about
Mhm.
how do you find out and how can you know
Yeah.
about your insulin resistance?
Mm.
So, have you ever had your blood work? Maybe you get it once a year, maybe you get it once every 3 months, and your blood sugar is fasting. Now, why does your doctor want you to do fasting? We want you to do fasting because that says when you've had a period without eating, what is your body's ability to manage whatever sugars in your blood? Okay. So that's one thing. The hallmark that we look for is the hemoglobin A1C. So it's HgA1C if you're going to look at it. And if you haven't had a hemoglobin A1C, I would highly recommend you get one. One, you can
Mhm.
buy tests at any major pharmacy that you can do over the counter, or go to your provider the next time you're there and saying, I think I want to look at my hemoglobin A1C. I want to look at my blood sugar. Now, this is like a 3-month running average of what does your blood sugar look like. So
Mhm.
it's not, oh, I had a rough day yesterday and my blood sugar's up. This
Mhm.
is a 3-month average. You can't cheat it. And
Yeah.
anything that's 6 or higher is
Mhm.
considered in the diabetic range. Okay, so Robin says she knows hers is a 6. We'd
Mhm.
like you to be between 5 and 6. Some of the more athletic or the more like rigorous people might be down even in 4s. Mine normally runs a 5, 5.2. Do you
Mhm.
know what yours runs, Dr.
Y-
Kosterman?
Yeah, I was a 4.8, I think, last time I took it.
You are such an achiever.
And okay, so I really I think this is a really important point. I remember so that number has gone up for me. I used to be a little bit lower, and I mentioned to my doctor, I was like, shoot, I need to work on that. And she's like, oh, it goes up as you get older. And I just
Yeah.
remember thinking to her, like, that is the most inane thing I've ever heard. I'm like, sure, maybe statistically because people don't take care of themselves, but it doesn't need to go up. This is important for people to hear. It does not have to go up. This is a byproduct of me not taking care of myself. So mine's going to come back down. But right, when practitioners tell you, and this is so important for people to hear, if a doctor tells you don't worry about it, that goes up with age, come consult with us and ask us that question if
Yeah,
that's true or not.
exactly.
I
Yeah.
almost lost it on my provider when she said that. I was like, girl.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was telling you about my folks, and I was up seeing my dad this week, and then my mom has type 2 diabetes, and they've both given me permission to do this. Dad before, he wasn't able to do it, but mom is his POA, and she's given me permission. But so mom was on a GLP-1 and had some side effects. So we pulled her off, and I was amazed how much her hemoglobin went up, her
Mhm.
hemoglobin A1C. And she said, I just want to be able to eat anything that I want to eat
Mhm.
and not gain weight and not have problems. And I said,
You
you
and
and
me
every
both,
other
sister.
person that I know. Yeah.
You and me both.
Yeah. But the interesting thing was we got her a continuous glucose monitor, a CGM, and she was able to see her
Mm,
healthy snacks start to pop her blood
yeah.
sugar. And all of a sudden, she could recognize that her body couldn't handle a kind bar or
Yeah.
a, a whole bunch of canned fruit. And so
Yeah.
she would start making better choices. And
Mm.
that hemoglobin A1C went from an 8
Mhm.
down to a 7.5, down to a 7.2,
Mhm.
simply because she had data. And she
Yeah.
had the data that showed what I put in my mouth and how much I move
Yeah.
really matters. And so she found that water aerobics got her more benefit than chair aerobics.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so these are the little things that you can look for those of you who have your report, or like Robin says, I have prediabetes, but I have the gene, the TCF
Yeah.
702 with the GG. GG
Which
is where
is
you get your
favorable.
optimal response and the
Mhm.
least risk. GT is suboptimal, and you've got to be careful, which is what I have. I have to be, both sides of the family have insulin dysregulation.
Mm.
And then a
Mhm.
TT would be suboptimal, and you'd have the highest risk. Remember, this is a blueprint. And then how do we live within it? So, one of my recommendations tonight is if you don't know your hemoglobin A1C, get that as soon as possible. And just know your risk. Are you a
Yeah.
GG? Are you a GT? Or are you TT? So you've got an idea of the risk, but then let's see where the rubber meets the road and where you're doing. If you are above a 5.5, you got some work to do. You've got some work to
Mhm.
do, and you need to look at. I also want you to look at your triglycerides.
Mhm.
If you look at your triglycerides are directly related to how much sugar is in your diet.
Mhm.
Now, mine run about 45. Do you know what yours run?
No, I do not. That was not.
Okay. Well, I
Mm-mm.
can tell you that the client with the highest amount that I've ever had was 1,300. 1,300. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I'm not
We
sure
were,
I've ever seen that number on paper before, like in this context.
yeah. Usually you want them less than 150. So if you're 50 or
Yeah.
60, you've got the sugar out of your diet. Okay. That's great. Kudos. If you're 150, even 200, you've got a little carbs that are slipping in there, or you're having a little too many cheats.
Did the
Um,
library run that? That's incredible.
yeah. Yeah. But at this 1,500 or this 1,300 that we had, literally doing a diet journal, cleaning up two or three
Yeah.
things, and then I wasn't willing to wait 3 months. I mean, we waited just a month, but within a month, it had dropped to 600. Now,
Yeah.
600. Oh, I love Sarah. Sarah's are 65. Way to go. And she's got a
Yeah, girl.
TT. Now, that shows you are moving and you have the sugar out of your diet. Well
Yeah.
done, Sarah. Kudos for that. That
Yeah.
shows you can overcome your DNA when you're doing that. Yeah.
And you can also, I think it's important for people to hear, regardless where they're starting, they can still overcome it. I read
Mhm.
this really neat study, and I think this is important for people to hear. It was a study, and it was looking at dementia outcomes, i.e., do you get dementia as you go along? And they started with a group of people that had cardiometabolic issues.
Mhm.
This means they either had cardio, probably like high blood lipids, high blood pressure, so the cholesterols that we're talking about, metabolic meaning blood sugars, right? So probably pre-diabetes to diabetes in those spaces. So these are people, current day people with problems. These aren't people who start off like happy, young, and healthy. They implemented a Mediterranean diet, which
Mhm.
is a diet that's going to be high in fish, high in vegetable, right? High in the olive oils and some good unsaturated fats. And then as well as accompanied by like modest, happy portions of carbohydrate, right? Often root vegetables or bread, something along those lines. So they had these people switch diets. They were able to reduce their risk of dementia, even though they had starting off with this like a more problematic terrain. they were able to reduce their risk of dementia by 30%, right? I think that's so very important to hear that even just like a small shift, regardless where you're starting, can change that for you, right? Wherever you are this evening, you have that capacity to change. And I think that's really important to hear. Regardless of the genes, we just know if the genes are there, you kind of got to work a little bit harder.
Well, and I love because Christina says her
Yeah.
triglycerides are 36. And then
Yeah.
Melissa says she has a GT, so she's right in the middle, but she's kind of
Hmm.
55. And
Yeah.
so,
Look at you guys.
it's fascinating to see,
Yeah.
good, bad, or ugly. It's what you're doing with it.
Yeah.
Denise also brings up fasting insulin is
I love
important.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I use my fasting insulin. How do you use yours? I use mine to calculate HOMA, which is a homeostatic metabolic assessment.
Yeah. I also do just I like to check because I like to have more data points when I'm looking into where is the metabolic fitness of a person. So HbA1c is just kind of one of those points, and I'll leverage this with others, and especially ensuring they're actually fasting.
Right, right. Can you go, a couple people were looking about Canada, and I'm not sure the conversion. It says I'm in Canada, my triglycerides are a 0.72. The scale is 0.43 to 2.69. And then we
Yeah.
also had somebody else that says there's this 0.85. Where do you look for
Mhm.
people to be triglycerides if you're looking at the metric conversion in Canada?
Yeah, give me a second. I'll be honest, I do not know that range off the top of my head. So
Okay.
yeah, just give me 1 second.
So it sounds like at least on Susan's, um, that the range she uses, and we should actually talk about lab ranges for a minute.
Hmm.
Um, at least in the States, there are reference ranges, but they change all the time. And they change
Hmm.
based on the population. They throw out the top 10%, they throw out the bottom 10%, and then they give what they've seen over the last year in the middle. Now, remember, this is a lot of sick people that are getting this, not necessarily healthy. Yes, some healthy people do, but they tend to skew the ends. And so we don't like to look at the whole range. We like to look at optimal. That's why I was
Hmm.
saying that 6 and higher, you've got an issue. I'd like to have you 5 to 5.5 is
Yeah.
going to give you a much better measure. That's your optimal range, not your wide range.
Yeah, I have the Canadian range, but just before that, I have a very like a fascinating anecdote with that. So,
Yeah,
um, I was working with a woman who had been trained by a surgeon, and he was an older fellow, especially when she started training. And when he took her under his wing, he started talking about how lab ranges had changed over the years. To Dr. Steph's point, the lab ranges will kind of increase to reflect the population.
right.
So he was saying when he used to do his intakes, there were certain liver parameters that he was like, if the liver was showing stress above this point, right, he wouldn't do surgery. He'd require certain things be done before he does that. And he's like, now I still go by those markers because I know the outcomes. I know what numbers actually mean, but the numbers have gone so high up in what is acceptable because there is so much stress within livers and other organs of the body that I think he said the current upper limit is something like 6 times I forget I'm making up numbers at this point in time, but it was to the point where, 10, 20 years ago, he would not have had surgery on that person, but it's now considered normal. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's really important, I think, to have kind of reference ranges gauged against someone who, to your point, knows more the ideal window as opposed to the permissible window.
Well,
So
I
for
think a lot of people on here tonight probably remember the 3 Mile Island radiation um, plant that had a disaster. And that radiation impacts thyroid. So while a normal range in the area that I'm living in the Midwest is 0.46 up to maybe 4 or
Mhm.
3.99 for thyroid,
Mhm.
in the area where 3 Mile Island is, they have like 6 to 10. Now, if
Mhm.
somebody's thyroid and thyroid stimulating hormone is a 6 to 10, I'm going to go, oh my God, oh my God, what are we doing to back your
Yeah.
thyroid? But because they've had so much environmental exposure,
Mhm.
then that's the norm there. So again, we
Yeah.
want to look at optimal because
Yeah.
I know our clients, our people who show here, you're looking to optimize your wellness.
Mhm.
You don't do a DNA test because you go, oh, great, I've got all these terrible markers and I'm just going to let them go. No. And we've seen tonight with so many people already are going, hey, I've got these like cruddy markers, but look on my actual, I'm showing up okay because I do things about it.
Yeah.
And talking about environment, one of the things that's a hot topic in literature right now is microplastics. Oh my
Mm.
goodness. And an article that just came out in February of this year in the European Medical Journal, this was February 13th of 2025,
Mhm.
shows groundbreaking study in accumulation of microplastics in the brain, the liver, and the kidneys. Now, this is a early study, but what they found is the liver and the kidneys will process and push this out, but the brain holds on to it. And so let's think about all the places in our diet, in our environment that we have plastics. So, Dr. Kosterman, what are some areas that you can think of plastics in the environment that people have in their control and things they may want to do?
I think first and foremost, where a lot of people get their water, right?
Hmm.
I think a lot of people there's yeah, so I can appreciate, especially through different areas of the US and Canada as well. Um, Water supply, tap water may not be safe. So a lot of people say, well, hey, I'm going to drink bottled water because I at least know that is clean and controlled for. The struggle with that is that bottled water typically comes in plastic bottles, and we know there's incredible leaching that will go from that plastic bottle into the water. I don't fully remember the engineering process behind it. I had a chemical engineer once teach me about it, but effectively they put that water in the bottle when it's still hot, and then a cooling will kind of enable how that bottle forms. And remember, when we talk about plastics, one of the bigger pieces of advice lately is don't heat your food up in plastic because once it's hot, it increases the leaching. So we're talking about bottles of water that quite literally the water was put in while that plastic was still very hot and malleable. So there's incredible leaching there. So I think one of the quicker things that I can see, in particular, Americans and Canadians too, is switching that habit up. Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean go out to the store and buy like cases upon cases of glass bottles. Those are tricky to recycle.
Hmm.
More maybe thinking around, can you get a water filtration system? And then can you switch
Right.
to glass bottles, to the stainless steel containers, to things of that nature, right? So that you're not on a daily basis, quite literally ingesting an incredible amount of microplastics that then make their way up to the brain and kind of hang out there and can't are tricky to clean out.
Well, and I like what you said about takeout containers. So if you look
Hmm.
at a takeout container and you're eating warm food, the food that's touching that plastic
Mhm.
takeout container is absorbing. Whether
Yeah.
it is a paper container that's lined with plastic because it's so slippery, whether it's one of the plastic styrofoam, especially if you take that styrofoam and then the next day you're going to reheat and you notice it
Hmm.
gets real crispy. What has happened is the plasticizers have pulled out of that container and they've gone directly into your food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about this article in the European Medical Journal, besides saying that the brain accumulated and couldn't release it, where the liver and the kidneys would, was the number one polymer that they found was polyethylene. So now let's talk about this. I hate to be your killjoy.
Oh, girl,
Polyethylene.
I don't like this already. I feel attacked. I feel attacked already.
Yeah.
Continue.
Polyethylene glycol is in a lot of our cosmetics, and it's in Miralax. It's in fingernail. Yep, exactly.
Mm.
So
Facts.
let's look at what you need to do to pull plastic out. If you have Miralax that you're taking regularly or even irregularly for regularity, because it's going to help someone poop, it's going to help, it's a stool softener. Well, how about we look at prunes? How about we look at hydrating water with electrolytes? How about we look at some extra magnesium? Let's look at things that don't contain polyethylene.
Yeah.
And if you start reading your labels on things that you are consuming or putting on your body, and you see the words polymer or polyethylene, you're going to have to think twice or thrice about, is that something that I want in or on my body, or is there a safer place that I can use?
Yeah. 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 And I think that nature of questioning is really important because you're going to get some people whose answer is, no, I enjoy that, right? It's kind of like alcohol.
Okay.
Occasionally I enjoy that, and that is what it is. It's just you need to walk in, it be a very educated and informed decision. You
It
don't
does.
want this to be a decision that you look back on, you're like, whoops, I wish I had thought about that. And it wasn't important to me, so I wish I could have changed that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Jane's offering a really good thought here, the abbreviation that you'll see on especially cosmetics, because they tend to have very small bottles, so they won't write out the full chemical name. You'll
Mhm.
see things like PEG and often like PEG dash number or PEG
Mhm.
dash letters, which is just the same, but a different chemical form.
Yeah. So
So learning
PEG stands for
labels.
the polyethylene glycol. Jane, good catch on that. Thank you for helping us with
Amazing.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and before I think we should shift into questions and answers, I just quickly want to come back to the Canucks or non-Americans in the audience and the triglyceride levels.
Yeah.
So what you'll see on your reports, if it's anything over 1.7, that's where it starts to get into, at least on the conventional side of things, being too high, and doctors will take more action usually once it gets around to 2.3, give or take. If you're talking about an ideal range, mine tend to sit in and around 1. Sometimes I'll allow it to creep a little bit higher if there's circumstances, because triglycerides can sometimes go up in response to fat. When we talk about the bottom numbers, there's not really a studied bottom number other than to say if you're dipping below zero point 0.3, zero point 0.5, somewhere in that space, it can suggest a malnutrition or a thyroid issue. So if you're kind of really dipping low, that needs to be investigated because you need triglycerides, right? They're the body. Um,
We do.
Body is all things. So there's for the Canucks. And I think it's time that we jump into our questions now, Dr.
Yeah.
Nielsen, unless I've forgotten anything else.
No, I mean, there's some come up with things that I think will come up when we answer the
Yeah.
questions. But so Deborah just says, how do nanoplastics found in water bottles and food containers play a role? I think we've answered that. I hope you felt like you got something there. So we've
Yeah.
got that taken care of.
Okay. It's to the theme though, I think again of like how sensitive the brain is. And it's
Hmm.
that sensitivity to too much fat, that sensitivity to too much sugar, that sensitivity to too much neurotoxins, and in this case, the PEG. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So Anna says, I'm noticing some drop in my memory, but honestly, I've never had a great memory. Very
You and
little,
I
in
both,
fact.
girl.
And I'm wondering about your take on why I've never had a good memory. I'd like to hear a little bit more about maybe ways that I could make my memory
Hmm.
sharper.
Interesting. And you can toss this answer in the chat. Do you have your DNA 360? Well, okay. I'm gonna quickly gloss on the genetics of it, and then maybe Dr. Nielsen, if you want to gloss on just the generals of it. But I think from a genetic perspective, right, we'd want to look at a lot of moon behavior memory encoding genes, and there are some profiles, especially mixed with certain environmental factors, that can contribute to how happy the brain is. You're not going to find one gene per se. It's often going to be a network that's mixed in with the environment. There's not one gene per se that says you will or will not have good memory. So that would be my first thought. I'd also really want to understand what does that mean, because poor memory could also just be poor ability to focus. And so if you're touching in on other diagnoses that relate to focus and attention, that can also be part of it. So I'd be very curious as to your ability to focus and attend things. Is that contributing, or is it something, to your point, very specific to memory? Dr. Nielsen, any other thoughts there?
Absolutely. So first thing, we talked about blood sugar. I would look at your blood sugar and look at your diet. Let's make sure that you've got steady blood sugar. Second thing is, how much do you exercise? Movement, especially cross
Mhm.
movement, is really critical for working both sides of the brain. So what are you doing to move both sides of your body? And whether it's a Zumba dance, whether it is cross crawling or, exercises that way. What are you doing for movement? Third thing is, what are you doing as far as neuroplasticity for, or do you play brain games? Do you play memory games? The more you challenge yourself with those neuro games, the better. Now, Anna, you may be interested. There's a lot of online games that you can do. There's a whole group called Luminosity, which is specifically does a pretest, and then they do, depending on the weaknesses in your memory, they will target games that are fun and interesting, and then you can watch your progress. So I would say body movement, brain plasticity, blood sugar are all things that would be real helpful. You can also use nootropics, and nootropics help with focus in the brain, especially like acetylcholine.
Mhm.
So those would be the first couple places I would start. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'd want to see genes, right? Because I think there's so
Sure.
many different genes that would speak to different spaces, from BDNF to stress to
Yep.
focus.
Yep.
All of those, right? Like, it's difficult. Loss of memory can be due to so many different things. I'd want to dig a little bit deeper there, but perhaps
Yeah.
something for you, Anna, to be considering.
Yeah.
Right.
Teresa said, is this
Mhm.
recorded? It is recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording. So, any of you that are asking questions about, can you go through the APOE again, or can you go through the insulin resistance again with the TCF7L2? You can go back and hear. We've already covered those. So, yes, it's recorded. Yes, you
Mhm.
will get a copy. Go back through with your report. In fact, there was a question about what part of the report. I think probably for me, if you went and look at your longevity report, you're going to see a lot of the things that we've talked about and a few extras that you can look at. So, Teresa, yes, it's recorded. I know you have to jump off. We'll see you soon. Um, what is the percentage? Now, Dr. Costa, I mean, you may or may not know,
Mhm.
what is the percentage of the population that has the ApoE 3, 4, and again, the risk, I think you said the risk was 10 to 15% higher?
Yeah, so from and this is tends to be a bit more specific to Caucasian populations. We're seeing a little bit of mirroring within African and Chinese, but that's still early studies. But those within Caucasian populations, the 4 allele you'll see in approximately 25%. And so, to kind of speak to mama and papa versions, if you have a 3, 4, that tends to be about 15 to 25% of a Caucasian population. And the 4, 4, that is less. That's about 2 to 4% of Caucasian populations. So 3, 4 will increase your risk approximately double. And then if you're talking 4, 4, it's up to 10 times the risk. So I hope that gave the population breakdown.
Yeah,
Well,
that's great.
yeah.
Christina says she's never gotten a recording. And how can she find them? So I'm going to ask the powers that be
Mhm.
that go behind the scenes. Can you
Yeah.
reach out to Christina and maybe double check? Oh, Christina, there's a note in for you right there on how to go to our YouTube channel to look at those if you're not
Mhm.
getting those. They may end up in your spam on your email, but if you're getting the requests that show that we're going to have a webinar, you likely will be getting the
Mhm.
recordings following up that too. Now,
Yeah.
Barbara's got an interesting question. She says, how about a mechanism of low blood sugar, especially dropping at
Mhm.
3 a.m.?
Oh, yes. Dr. Steph, please.
No, no, I'm going to let you go first.
Well, I would offer that's probably indicative of a struggle within your body to manage blood sugar, right? We'd have to ask, what are you eating? If you're not eating all day and that happens, different question. But
Mhm,
typically your insulin, part of its job alongside liver and a few other parts of body, is to have pretty stable blood sugars
mhm,
throughout the night. You'll have your last meal, so they'll come up, and then eventually the goal of the body is for them to come to a point where it's sustained more or less throughout the evening. This is why Dr. Steph was saying we want that fasted insulin or that fasted blood work to understand, how is your body dealing with that fasted period, right? Because it won't be as high as when you've eaten, but it should be pretty consistent. And so sometimes what you see in metabolic dysregulation is that if the body can't maintain that and there's a drop, that will wake a person up, right? Having low blood sugar, the body isn't, the moment something drops or kind of gets out of that comfy normal range within the body freaks out a little bit. You get a little bit anxious or you'll get woken up because the body's response is something isn't right. I need to fix it. And in
Mhm.
this instance, blood sugar's gone too low. And how do you fix that? The body gets a little bit hungry. And so you want to be bringing in some sugar to level that out. So if
Mhm.
you're dropping at 3 a.m. in particular, if it's waking you up such that you know it's at 3 a.m., it's suggestive body is struggling to maintain your blood sugars.
Mhm.
Steph, anything to add to that?
Well, so I would say, what time is your last meal? What is your last meal? Are
Oh,
you doing things that are sustaining? Thanks, Denise.
mm.
Thank you. Appreciate
Au
your
revoir,
feedback.
madame.
Love you. Um, I would say, are you eating solid protein? Are you eating some fat? Interesting thing is that babies that wake up and eat frequently, especially nursing babies, there has been some anecdotal kind of mom advice where moms have been giving a teaspoon of butter to a child before bed because the
Mm-hmm.
fat
Mm-hmm.
stabilizes their blood sugar and they will sleep longer.
Mm.
So, something you can look at is a nootropic,
Mm-hmm.
like a mushroom cacao to drink at bedtime that helps relax the body, and putting a scoop of butter in there or putting a
Mm-hmm.
scoop of coconut oil and frothing that up, enjoying that real luxurious type of nighttime that will help the body relax. I would also look at stress. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when you look between 1 and 3 a.m., this is on a traditional Chinese calendar or a clock when the liver is processing.
Yeah.
So I would look at your liver. What is your liver function? How healthy is your liver? Do you need to do a liver detox? Because when the liver is detoxifying and cortisol levels go up and wake people up, then blood sugar can also drop. So I think there's a lot of things that we can look at here. I would wonder what your blood sugars would run during the day or what your blood sugars would run under other stressful periods for you. Do you normally have stressful sleep or do you wake up frequently? So
Mm-hmm.
um, those are a few things I would think about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very comprehensive answer. I like that. I like when we tag team. And I also really value um Dr. Varden and I did a webinar on Tuesday and we brought up the clocks on Tuesday, the different TCM clocks. So I like
Mhm.
that that's becoming a recurring theme.
Yeah.
Okay, Madeline has our next question, and she's asking, how reliable is the Tau 323 blood test for Alzheimer's? Um, Dr. Steph, are you able to speak to that one? If not, I
I'm
can.
actually not. I'll look it up
Okay.
real quickly, but it's not
Yeah,
something that I've used or addressed. So let me see if I
yeah.
can look up and see.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
why don't we go to
Um,
another one and we'll come back to
yeah,
that in a minute.
yeah. So Claudia is asking the question, and I think this I love this question for the females in the audience, and I know Steph, this will be near and dear to your heart. Do we have do we have to care in um menopause about something that will trigger Alzheimer's? So kind of the question is, does Alzheimer's bring about or sorry, does menopause, apologies, does menopause bring about Alzheimer's? I'm not aware of research that says if this, then that because of, but what I am aware of is what happens within menopause and how that can set the body up for poor brain health, which then will lend to dementia and potentially ultimately Alzheimer's. What do I mean by that? So remember that menopause is that stopping of hormonal cycling that allows a period. There's a dramatic drop in estrogen. There's a dramatic drop in progesterone. What that will mean to the body is it shifts blood pressure. It shifts how you manage your insulin and other blood sugar regulators. It shifts how your brain processes things. A lot of things change because of that. You become a little bit more inflamed because estrogen supports to a certain extent management of that. Okay. So when you think about all those things together, right? More dysregulated blood sugar, a poor cardiovascular system, higher blood pressure, things like that, right? That without the neuroprotection, the immune protection of estrogen, those sorts of things are things that can support the development of dementia and Alzheimer's. So I wouldn't say that menopause means and will cause Alzheimer's, but it can kind of create that space, which is why it's really important to understand where you sit in that spectrum and what are you doing to really support yourself through that, right? That doesn't necessarily mean BHRT. A lot of people will turn to that, right? But examining your options, being very aware of that, especially if there's a risk of Alzheimer's or dementia within the family, or you're coming into menopause with high blood sugars, high blood pressures, things that again will lend to increasing that risk of dementia. Dr. Steph,
Mhm.
anything to add, or do you want to jump back to our tau question?
Well, we'll finish the menopause and then we'll go back to the tau.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that hormone regulation, I think, is critical for all healthy longevity.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen numerous clients that have gone through, for example, men, prostate cancer, and then they've been on products that reduced their hormones so that it would not further prostate growth. But it dysregulated all of their hormones. And so there was a cost benefit ratio. As hormones decline, we know we accelerate aging, and then they lose their ability to have as strong cognition. Also, I can tell you that I've had patients that have gone through chemotherapy and have chemotherapy brain, and they are told not to go on hormones. And if you look at suppression of cholesterol, cholesterol is the mother to produce all your hormones. So if you're suppressing your cholesterol, if you've gone through chemotherapy, if you're on suppressive agents to lower the impact of your hormones on certain body systems, that will accelerate cognitive decline. And people will say, I've got chemo brain, or
Mm-hmm.
after menopause, I just couldn't think anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I would say, Claudia, is if you don't have some other mitigating factor, really look at your hormones and getting those hormone levels back up, not necessarily to pre-menopausal levels, but peak levels that allow your body to operate at a more efficient rate. And that will maintain the brain function along the way. You may remember that last year we talked about, I guess it was about May of last year. So almost a year ago, the Journal of Menopause came out in the United States. They had taken Medicare and they had done a retrospective study over 10 years with 10 million charts. And what they found is women that had gone on supportive hormonal therapy. Now, it didn't matter if it was BHRT or HRT, it doesn't matter if it was 1 month or 10 years. What they found across the board was that the benefits outweighed the risks and reduced all cause mortality as well as specific. And they listed Alzheimer's and cancers and osteoporosis and dementias. So the sooner you can say, gosh, I think I'm going through perimenopause, get those hormones stable. The benefits are not as great after menopause, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some. So if you're going through
Mm-hmm.
menopause or if you're shortly after menopause, you could consider hormone therapy to keep that brain more intact. And fat is your friend, but we went healthy fats, and
Mm-hmm.
particularly omega-3s. Now, there's a lot of data out there showing that omega-3s may or may not be the panacea, but it is the type of omega-3s. They've got to be non-toxic. They can't have the mercury, PCBs, and dioxins in them. And they have to be paired with polyphenols, because polyphenols is how they occur naturally in nature. So it's really fatty fish. And I know all of you are going to be so excited when I say sardines, anchovies, mackerel. You should have it 2 to 3 times a week. But I'll tell you, that is a quick, easy fix for a fatty fish that is going to really nourish your brain and get those omega-3s. The omega-3, omega-6 balance should be at a 1-to-1, 2-to-1, or 3-to-1. And on average in North
Mm,
America, we're like
mm.
23-to-1 because we have so many seed
Omega
oils
sixes.
in
Yeah.
our processed foods. So a high quality omega-3 is also really going to help you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Now, if
Well,
we get back
that was
to,
brilliant. Yeah. Do you have some insight to us for the towel?
yeah, well, Tau is really hot in the last 7 days. That could be why I don't know a lot about it, but
Mm,
see a ton of articles on the accuracy of blood diagnosis with Alzheimer's
mm,
looking for the tau protein. Turns out that the
mm,
tau protein is a fairly recently new studied, and it shows up to 92% accuracy measuring MTBR tau 243. Now you said 323. So, but
mm-hmm.
what I found was 243. So the
Okay.
tau proteins are located in the brain and they're starting to quantify them. And they're looking at those proteins and saying, if I have X amount, it leads more toward. Now, what I don't know is if we know how to reverse those, or what I don't know, literally it says 7 days ago, 6 days ago, 2 days ago. So you caught us with some of the most cutting edge presentation, Madeline. So
I
I guess
adore
we'll
our
be looking
audience.
up some
Yeah.
tau. But so thank you for that. I always
Yeah.
love learning something. And
Mm,
tau blood tests appears, at least from a center in Australia, a center
mm,
at Washington University. And it's called Novel Blood Tests Could Truly Help Diagnose and Track Progression of Alzheimer's. And that came from Medscape.
mhm.
So it sounds like we need to learn more about tau. So thank you.
I love it. Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah.
Okay, Marianne
Can
has.
stress elevate? Oh, yeah,
Mm.
you were about ready to do that. There you go.
Yeah, because I'm going to leave the next one to you because I think you might be able to decipher the first little bit better than I.
Okay.
Um, can stress elevate HbA1c? So this is that marker of blood sugar. And to Dr. Steph's point, this is a 3-month measure. So we kind of
Mhm.
think about this like a movie, right? We're able to watch a movie and how has your blood sugar been in the past 3 months? So can stress elevate it? The answer is yes, but it also needs to be a chronic and sustained stress, something
Mhm.
that is wearing on your body for 3 or more months. And why do we say this? So when you're stressed, you release a lot of cortisol. And cortisol is our fight or flight hormone. If you take us back to the proverbial plains, into the proverbial jungles, cortisol was that thing that if you saw a tiger would spike so that you can either run away from the tiger, you can hide from the tiger, you can fight the tiger. And to do that, it would effectively stop the digestion, stop your use of sugar and some other things, and then also pump more sugar into the body so that you have that fuel to do that fighting or running or whatever you're doing to deal with the tiger. So if you're living in a state of chronic stress, your body's constantly getting these bushes of sugar. And additional to that, your insulin is being dysregulated, both by the cortisol and then some other mechanisms. So this will elevate. And this is kind of where we get to this idea of stress literally kills. There's many mechanisms that stress kills with. We see stress and poor sleeping, poor stress habits as something an independent risk factor for Alzheimer's, for diabetes, for heart attack, for all the things. So can it? Yes, but again, it's also one of those things that can also be reduced over time. You just have to make some changes and then take that movie again. Um, Dr. Steph, any other thoughts for that?
Oh no, I think that's fabulous. And my answer was going to be yes, absolutely. And I don't think enough people um, take their stress seriously. And I love measuring 24-hour cortisols because we can see the
Mm,
levels. Do you have a flat cortisol awakening response? Do you have an appropriate cortisol? You can do it with salivary, you can do it with urine. When I see someone who's just constantly off the charts, and they're like, but I like this busy life. I like the
Mhm.
adrenaline I'm running on. I'm saying, well, you like it now because you're used to the go, 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 but you're going to like it until you crash,
Yeah.
and you're going to burn up every resource that you have in your body. And so there is a need to balance, a need
Yeah.
to have off time, a need to have creative, expressions, a need to have a time that feels safe and recharging, and not just
Mhm.
overstimulate. And there
Mhm.
are studies of literally getting out of the city, off our phones, spending 3 days in nature. In 24 hours, you can lower cortisol levels by 20 to 30%. But if you will stay 72 hours out, whether it's camping or by a beach or just in a very non-stressful, relaxed environment, the recharge and reset of your body and the cortisol levels can be lowered by 50 to 60%. Now, a lot of people just jump
Mhm.
right back in and go, okay, I'm going to keep going. But what you've learned is, just like you've got these cell phones that we're so attached to, you know, and we can't just go, 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 because they fall off, they lose their battery, they lose their charge. You've got
Mhm.
to go, and then you need to recharge them, and you need to go and recharge them. And remember, this is replaceable, but this is not. So you've got to remember to recharge, and stress will kill, and chronic stress will kill you
Mhm.
faster. Yeah.
Mhm. 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 Yep.
So Madeline says keto pills increase triglycerides but can help you lose weight. So I don't know if you're talking about ketones or if you're talking about like a fat bomb. I'm not really sure when you say keto pills,
Mhm.
um, what you're referring to. I haven't seen a lot of people in ketosis with their triglycerides going up.
Mhm.
Uh, so,
Yeah, that's fair.
okay.
All right.
Um, Plastic exposure. Are you talking about large bottles from a dispenser being dangerous as well?
Yeah.
So, Margaret, what we're talking about is, the more flexible a plastic is, the more plasticizers that are in it. And yes, the big 5-gallon jugs, if the water is heated in there, it will leach. It will not leach as much. The stiffer the plastic, the harder it is, the less plasticizers and the less leaching. But what a lot of things that we don't have control over are how water bottles are stored outside of how you store them. So if you have a large plastic water bottle, and then you take it, like I used to live in Southern California, and I lived at a place that had a pure aquifer, and we could buy the water straight from the aquifer. And yes, most of us used the hard plastic. Some of us had the glass bottles, and Mountains Valley Spring is considered the best water in all of North America. It's been tested, and it's down in the Ozarks. They only come in glass bottles. They only come in green glass bottles. But I know they're very heavy, and so they can be expensive to ship and get around.
Mhm.
But yes, if that water bottle, if you store 2 or 3 of those 5 gallons and they get heated up, that will leach some plastic. Now, you may have to use smaller jugs, the 2-gallon jugs or the 3-gallon jugs that are glass, to avoid that, because glass doesn't leach. But remember, this is a cost benefit ratio. If you get rid of all the little soft, squishy ones that crackle, 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 and you're only using the big ones, and you're running it through a filter, then you know what? You've done a good job. And give yourself grace. I'd rather have you make one step forward than I would have you just go, this is too much. I can't do anything. So I switched off of plastic water bottles and plastic clear containers to the stainless steel. Now, I still have a plastic top. I still drink from a plastic straw. Sometimes I drink from a stainless straw, but I keep mine chilled. I don't put hot in here, and I don't ever drink from like a coffee cup that has a plastic lid on it. I will remove, and I'd even tell them, leave it an inch or two down, because I don't want to slosh and spill like if I'm traveling in the car. So I will reduce that risk of that. But the less plastic, the better. And especially with the new data that we're finding, that the brain absorbs it and holds it.
Mhm. Love it. Thank you, Madeleine.
Okay.
Right.
Janice, is a lipoprotein
Yeah.
A implicated in dementia in general or the Alzheimer's
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, and so far it's implicated in both. I think a little bit more studied within Alzheimer's because that gets a lot of money. And so this is a fat protein, and we're finding that this one specifically in higher concentrations will lend towards cardiovascular disease. And so this tends to bring about more the vascular forms of dementia. Vascular really meaning that the vasculature isn't properly able to infuse and support brain. And so there's a bit of an atrophying and a dying because of that lack of support from those blood vessels, which deliver all the good things. The reason why is the lipoprotein A tends to be a bit more pro-inflammatory and I can never say this properly, but atherogenic, meaning kind of the heart. I think
You
I saw
did
her
it. You
smile, so
got
I
it.
got it.
Atherogenic. Yes.
Yes, it's a victory. I like it today. So really just looking at plaques within arteries that we know over time kind of stiffen things and make things just not as flexible and happy. So this is why. So it's one of those things that is now really starting to be tracked in terms of dementia, namely more vascular dementia is associated with Alzheimer's. And so if you have a higher level, your clinician's probably going to want to be working with you on measures that will help reduce that, which by and large, and Steph, hold me honest, because I'm not sure if there's actually pharmaceutical intervention for this at that point. I think it's mostly diet and lifestyle. Is there anything targeted to that? Would that be targeted by general statins, or is that, I'm not familiar.
Sometimes we look at niacin as a
Mhm.
potential,
Okay. Okay.
but generally no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So I think if your levels are as high as you say they are, Janice, the 286, I'd really look to engage with a provider to
Mhm.
understand how you can do that. And having things like the DNA 360 will really help round out it to a bigger conversation than just maybe reduce what fats you're eating. You want a full encompassing plan, not something that's just specific to that one element. Yeah.
Yeah, and a couple Maria's also asking about some of the genes.
Mm,
As Krista just pointed out, the DNA 360 does a really, really good job with our longevity section and really presses upon someone, if you want not necessarily quantity, but quality, and that quality leads into quantity, is look at your longevity report. Most of the genes are going to be there. Maria, you will get a copy of the replay and we'll go through all the genes that you can go through there. Janice, I echo what Krista says. You would be a perfect person to work with a practitioner and look at all your blood work, look at all your genes, look at those risk ratios and see if there are some things that you could tighten up to really be maximizing what you've got going on. Yeah.
mhm.
So Robin, always good to see you. You always have great questions. And this is one I hadn't thought about, but I love this. What
Hmm.
about buying distilled water in plastic bottles for use in humidifiers?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
I know.
I
That's
see, I
actually
see your
brilliant.
face. You're like, me too. I hadn't thought
Yeah,
of
I hadn't thought about that either. I think about the molds that they accumulate and how you have to
it.
clean them out. And I use vinegars to descale them. But, Robin, I would say same type of thing as the little water bottles. You don't know. So you're going to have that plastic and then you're turning those into the mist, and the mist is going to make it even easier for you to breathe in. I would say
Hmm.
that that is a yuck. So my tendency would say, and what I've done at my house is I have a ceramic filter that filters out all the PCBs and the plastics and the hydrochloroforms and all the things, but it has a mineral core. So as the water filters through the ceramics and filters out all the junk, including the plastics, which I can literally once a month clean it out and have this fine sediment in there that I know is full of junk. So I clean that out and whatever, but then it has a mineral core, so it remineralizes it. So I get to keep the
Important.
minerals in.
Mhm.
And so whether you're looking at a burqa, whether you're looking at Aquacera, whether you're looking, even if you can start with something as simple as a Brita at home. I
Mhm.
think I would run it through something that is going to pull out with a 4 micron filter, as pull out as much as you can, and then just reduce your risk. But I think that was a
Yeah.
great question. I hadn't thought of that. That's why I
Yeah.
love our interactions that are so, back and
Mhm.
forth. And Jane, I know you've got to go. Thank you for the fine, kind compliment. I love that everybody has stayed, this whole time. This is just such an important topic. It's an important topic for our families, and it's an important
Yeah.
topic for ourselves, for our future, for our nature. Um, Anna, you're so cute. She says, I'm a glam pharmacist. Hey, I might steal that. I might use that. You're
Ooh,
a
I
glam
love that.
pharmacist.
I love that so very
Thank
much.
you, sweetheart. I appreciate you too.
All
So,
right.
all right, Marianne,
Yes, ma'am.
BDNF and memory.
Yes, BDNF in memory. So BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And we have a gene that really says how happy are you to be making it or not making it? And why do we care about that? So again, to reiterate the name brain-derived, meaning it comes from the brain. It doesn't even have to cross your blood-brain barrier. Your brain has direct access to it. Neurotrophic factor. Neurotrophic means brain growth factor. Okay. So this is a gene that looks at how much of miracle grow for your brain are you putting out. And statistically speaking, the more you have access to this, the more your brain is able to grow. And that will include growing things like memory. Okay, so remember that it was a really long time ago that science kind of said, I don't think we can grow neurons once we pass the age of 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever age they said. If you get bumped on the head, oh dear, you've lost all those neurons. We know that's not true. They don't grow as easily as they do when you're younger, but they can still grow. And BDNF is one of those things that's responsible for supporting that. Right. And so having access to BDNF really gives, again, miracle grow to the brain. You're able to form roots, you're able to form better connections. And it's through that you're better able to encode memories, right? And again, when we get older into dementia, it's usually the newer memories that we struggle with a little bit more because back in the day, a lot of those old memories were built when we had lots of miracle grow. So we want to be mindful of how do we do that, especially as we get older. And it's really neat in that a lot of the things you can be doing are diet and lifestyle related, right? Going through small periods of fasting will help that. Going through periods of cold or heat exposure, especially heat exposure, that will shock the body into making some. Right. Exercise, namely cardiovascular exercise. This is why there's such connection to dementia treatment plans and exercise,
Mhm.
right? That exercise not only encourages blood changeover and movement within the brain, right? That little squeegeeing of getting some of the junk out, it also encourages really good growth factors like BDNF, right? So,
Yeah, love
um,
it.
yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Do you want to tap into our last question there from, I
Yeah,
believe
well,
it's Madeline?
actually, we've got two quickies. Elaine,
Ah,
thank you so much for being a first timer. I'm so glad you learned so
oh,
much tonight. We're so happy that you were
welcome.
here. We're going to have to start asking how many first timers we have. Bring somebody back with you because we love it. This
Touche.
was great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Melissa said, wow, I never thought about dehumidifier question. That makes me wonder about CPAP users. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
that is so going right into the brain with that oxygen up there. You
yeah.
know what, Melissa? That's a big wow. Again, Robin, you bring such profound
Yeah.
questions to this. Thanks for being here. And yeah, filter, 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 guys. That brain's filtering for you, and we don't want it to. And then the last question, Madeline says, what about BPA-free plastic mixing bowls?
Mhm.
So my thought is plastic, babe, you know?
Mhm.
And when you're
Yeah.
scraping with a
Yep.
whisk or with a fork, you are putting off those small little chunks of plastic. I use stainless or I use glass.
Yep.
BPA means you're not going to have the endocrine disruptors in there, and they will be stiffer, but they're still plastic. And remember, it wasn't the BPA, it was the polymers and the polyethylene glycol.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
I think a quick quick chemistry lesson. Remember I said when you're looking at cosmetics, you look for PEG and then sometimes it'll come PEG dash a number, right? And I was saying it's still the same backbone. It's just that the decorations on that are a little bit different. And so anytime you're seeing BPA or BPB or something like that, remember that it's just kind of the decorations. And so I think to Dr. Steph's point, BPA is most studied because it was first discovered and offers so much endocrine disruption, but it's still just different decorations. And until we can prove it's safe, which is very difficult to do, we need to be a little bit dubious of it because we know that its neighbors that just have slightly different decorations cause a lot of problems. Is that fair, Dr. Steph? Yeah.
Yep. And the last thing is, Christina, you said we skipped your question. We had already discussed the APO 3/4. We actually addressed it 2 or 3
Yeah.
times. We didn't get into the 9P21, but because we had done the other and we'd already addressed it multiple times, I think that's why we went ahead and did it. But Krista, do you want to go through? She was having a question about the 9P21 and then the 0 to 2G.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So what she's bringing up here, and I think you said that she was an ApoE 3/4, correct?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So APOE 3/4, a little bit of a risk there. And what she's bringing into that is 9P21. So 9P21 is a location within our genome that we know can be really influential into how much your cardiovascular system can become inflamed, right? And so remember, think about with dementia, a lot of the concern is how are you feeding the brain and cleaning the brain? And your vascular system is really important to that. And so if you know that the vascular system that feeds into the brain is more likely to become inflamed, it's more sensitive, right? Um, then you need to be extra mindful of what is sitting up in that brain from those extra sugars, those extra fats, those extra toxins, those extra plastics, right? So what Christina has said is that she has, I think, what was the G count? You said 2?
0 to 2.
Oh, she's 0 to 2? Okay. So she has a significantly lower G count, right? So we're looking at 3 different, or we're looking at a total of 6 Gs. You can be on a scale from 0G up to 6G. And we say by and large, those people that are 0 to 2 are in a bit more of a protective space because their cardiovascular system isn't innately primed towards a lot of inflammation, towards disproportionate, right? The more G's you get, the more sensitive your system is going to be insofar as just a little bit of a nuance will kind of send off a really big reaction. A very easy example of how to think about this is think about some people when they get bug bites, right? It happens, their body's like, whatever, okay, it resolves, it's gone in, a few hours, maybe a day if it's a really bad bug bite. That's some people. There's other people that they get that bug bite and it's huge and it's itchy and it's swollen and it lasts for a really long time. Those people that have that really quick big bite that does not last long, they tend to be our 0 to 2 Gs compared to like 5 or 6 tend to be those people that have that bug bite, that inflammation reaction for a really long time. So I think it's a beautiful thing that you have that 9P21. It by and large is protective, right? It just has to be something that you need to work towards, right? Ensuring that you still are reducing the sugars and the toxins, et cetera, things that can still aggravate and create that cardiovascular inflammation.
Yeah.
So I
And I
hope
know we have
that's
some
helpful.
more questions, but we have come to the end of our time. When you're asking questions, remember that we're trying to incorporate the whole audience. And
Yeah.
so being very specific with, hey, I have this, do I need to worry about, is more helpful than saying my specific gene is, tell me about
Mhm.
me, because we want to incorporate everybody who's here. But I'm so glad that we were able to get that. And Christine, I want to make sure that
Oh,
and you're welcome. I wanted to make sure that you didn't feel, I was like, I don't think we passed anything. I think we just felt that we'd
yeah.
answered it a few times and so didn't want to be
Okay.
redundant.
Good.
I wish we knew how to get all the plastics out of the brain. That is the number one thing that the article that came out in February said is we don't know yet how we're going to reverse all these microplastics that are accumulating. But I can tell you that there are people that are smarter than we are that are working on that. And as soon as
Yeah.
we know, we'll help you know. Take care. God bless. Good night. We appreciate you all being here. If you don't have your DNA 360 yet, make sure that you know that all of our tests have a 10% off this month. So go get those at our test bundles. Also, look at your longevity report, review this, and bring somebody next time. We're here to serve you, and we appreciate that you care about your health because your health is your wealth. Have a great night.
Mm.
Take care. God bless.
Bonne
Bye bye.
nuit. Au revoir.